July 2024, Wimbledon Centre Court. Kate, Princess of Wales, walks into the royal box, and the crowd of thousands of people who had spent months worrying, speculating, praying, rises to its feet. The ovation is long. It is genuine. It is one of the most emotionally charged moments the All England club has witnessed in a generation. Kate smiles. She waves. She sits. And for a moment, just a moment, it feels like the whole world exhales together. It is a perfect moment. Almost too perfect. Because here is what was happening in the 48 hours before Kate walked into that royal box. Meetings. Detailed, granular, nothing left to chance meetings between Kensington Palace communications staff, Wimbledon's own event management team, the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Unit, and a small group of senior royal advisors who had been planning this specific appearance at this exact moment for weeks. The angle of her entry, the timing relative to the match schedule, the positioning of cameras, the management of the crowd experience, the medical support available on site, the exit strategy if Kate became unwell, the talking points ready for palace spokespeople in every conceivable scenario. Nothing about Kate's Wimbledon appearance was accidental. Every single second of it was designed. Now here is the question that this fact forces us to confront. Does that make it less real? Or does it reveal something about the British monarchy that we need to understand and that the palace needs to answer for, regardless of how much we admire the woman at the centre of it? Tonight, we go inside the operation. All the way inside. We trace every appearance, every smile, every carefully positioned wave. And we ask the question that no royal correspondent with a palace press pass will ever ask on your television screen. Where does authentic recovery end and institutional management begin? If that question matters to you, and it should then before we go any further, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on your notifications, because this channel exists precisely to ask the questions that the establishment press will not. And what we are about to walk through together is, without question, one of the most sophisticated royal image operations in modern British history. You need to be here for every part of it. Now, let us begin. To understand why Kate's return was so carefully staged, you need to understand the scale of the crisis that preceded it. And I mean crisis in the full, institutional sense of that word. Not a bad news cycle, not a difficult fortnight, a genuine, measurable, structurally significant crisis of public trust. Cast your mind back to March 2024, the manipulated photograph. Now, we have covered that episode in forensic detail in a previous video on this channel, and if you have not watched it, the link is above. But the essential facts are these. Kensington Palace released a photograph of Kate with her children. Within hours, the world's major wire agencies, including the Associated Press, Getty Images, and Reuters, withdrew that photograph from circulation. Their verdict was explicit. The image showed signs of manipulation inconsistent with editorial standards. Let me be precise about what that means. These are not amateur bloggers speculating. These are the gatekeepers of professional photography for the entire global media industry. When they pull a photograph and cite manipulation, that is not an opinion. That is a professional determination backed by the most sophisticated image analysis tools available. And the palace, after an initial period of silence that itself spoke volumes, issued a response so inadequate, so breathtakingly breezy in its dismissal of a serious allegation, that it managed to make the situation considerably worse. Kate, they said, sometimes experiments with editing, as though we were discussing a hobbyist with a free phone application, rather than a communications office managing the image of the future Queen of England. The damage was significant. Not to Kate personally. Her cancer revelation, coming just days after the photograph scandal, immediately reframed public perception in the most human terms possible. The wave of sympathy and love that followed her March 22nd video was genuine and overwhelming. Nobody with any decency was going to attack a woman who had just told the world she had cancer. But the damage to the palace's communications credibility was real, lasting, and strategically serious. For the first time in Kate's public career, a career built painstakingly and brilliantly on an image of quiet, composed, relatable authenticity, the public had concrete, agency-confirmed evidence that her communications office was willing to present a doctored image as genuine. And that changed everything about how the palace had to plan her return. Because any reappearance that felt too staged, too managed, too glossy, too photographically flawless, risked triggering exactly the suspicion the photograph had created. The public, having been shown once that the palace would manipulate an image, would now apply that analytical lens to everything. Every photograph, every appearance, every carefully lit, beautifully framed moment of royal domesticity. Which meant that Kate's comeback could not look like a comeback. It had to look like a moment. A genuine, unforced, emotionally resonant moment that the public would experience as a gift, not as a performance. A moment that felt as though it had simply happened, organically, naturally, in the way that life sometimes produces these extraordinary confluences of person and place and feeling. Creating that impression, inside the most scrutinized communications environment in the world, required a level of planning that was, in its own cold, technical way, more sophisticated than anything the palace had attempted before. Now let us map the return, appearance by appearance. Because the sequence tells the story more clearly than any single moment within it could. And when you see the full sequence laid out, the architecture of the operation becomes visible in a way that the palace devoutly hopes it never will. Trooping the Colour, June 2024, Kate's first major public appearance since her cancer diagnosis. And the choice of venue was not random. It was not sentimental. It was strategic. Trooping the Colour is perhaps the most ceremonially rigid event in the entire British royal calendar. Every position is predetermined. Every movement is scripted by decades of military protocol. Every camera angle is known in advance, because nothing about the event changes from year to year, except the weather and the faces. Kate did not have to navigate an unpredictable public environment. She did not have to interact spontaneously with strangers. She did not have to manage unexpected questions or unscripted moments. She had to appear in a carriage, on a balcony, within a ceremonial structure so rigid that the only genuine variable was how she looked and how she seemed. The palace controlled every other element. She appeared, she smiled, she waved. The images were beautiful. The coverage was, with very few exceptions, overwhelmingly positive and deeply affectionate. And the palace communications team exhaled quietly, professionally, because Phase 1 had gone exactly as planned. Then came Wimbledon, July 2024. The second appearance, and considerably the more complex one. Trooping the Colour is a closed, protocol-bound environment. Wimbledon is a semi-public space, a stadium crowd, not a managed ceremonial structure. The risk level was materially higher, which is precisely why the planning was, according to those familiar with how these operations work, even more detailed. Consider what the Wimbledon appearance required. Kate needed to walk into a public space without the protective armour of the royal ceremony. She needed to look well genuinely, convincingly well, not performatively well. She needed to engage with those around her in a way that felt natural and warm. And she needed to do all of this while tens of thousands of people stared at her and hundreds of cameras captured every micro-expression, every movement, every blink. The timing of her appearance was not left to chance. It was calibrated to coincide with a match that guaranteed a packed, charged atmosphere on centre court. The emotional energy of that crowd, already in a heightened collective state after days of tournament coverage, already primed by weeks of public speculation about Kate's health, was itself a strategic asset. When thousands of people who were already feeling something deeply are suddenly confronted with the person they have been worrying about, standing in front of them, visibly alive and visibly well, the emotional response is almost physiologically inevitable. That crowd was always going to rise. The genius of the operation was not manufacturing the emotion. The genuine public affection for Kate is real and deep, and no communications team could manufacture that. The genius was selecting the environment most likely to allow that emotion to express itself in the most powerful, most globally resonant way possible. A standing ovation at Wimbledon, captured on cameras already positioned to broadcast to the entire world, is not the same as a warm reception at a regional engagement. It is monarchical theatre at its most operatically effective. And then the autumn engagements, September through November 2024. This is where the operation becomes subtler and, in some ways, more revealing. Because by autumn, the staging shifts register entirely. Kate begins appearing at less formally choreographed events, school visits, community engagements, the kinds of royal appearances that feel genuinely spontaneous precisely because their environments are less formally controlled. No ceremonial uniforms, no military protocols, no stadium cameras. Just a princess in a comfortable coat, talking to children, visiting local organizations, laughing at something a 7-year-old has said. This is the third phase of the return strategy. The deliberate, calculated move from ceremonial to relatable. From the managed grandeur of trooping and the stadium spectacle of Wimbledon, to the warmer, more intimate, more humanizing imagery of a mother who happens to be a princess, doing what princesses do when the cameras are smaller and the rooms are quieter. Each phase answered a specific public question. Trooping the Colour said, "She is well enough to be seen." Wimbledon said, "She is genuinely herself again." The autumn engagement said, "She is back to doing the real work." And then Christmas at Sandringham, December 2024. The walkabout, the family together. The images of Kate and William and their 3 children, wholesome, warm, unmistakably alive in the best possible sense, beamed around the world on Christmas morning. The monarchy, through Kate's carefully staged return, had reclaimed its most emotionally powerful narrative: the family. Resilience. The continuation of something that people find, whatever their views on the institution itself, genuinely moving. The operation was complete, and it had worked with a precision that privately, among those who understand how these things are built, was remarkable even by the palace's own exacting historical standards. But here is where I need to ask you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is part of the sympathetic coverage. And there has been an enormous amount of sympathetic coverage, much of it deserved, consistently and carefully omitted. Kate's comeback did not happen in isolation. It happened simultaneously with a set of institutional pressures that the monarchy desperately needed to address. Charles's cancer diagnosis, revealed around the same time as Kate's, had raised immediate and uncomfortable questions about the stability of the senior working royal family. The Andrew situation, the Duke of York's continued presence at Windsor, his continued attempts to rehabilitate himself, the palace's continued failure to resolve his position cleanly, was a source of ongoing reputational damage. Harry's legal battles were producing, in open court, testimony and documentation that painted an unflattering picture of how the palace treats its own members when they become inconvenient. And underneath all of this, the deeper, structural question that has hung over the institution since 2020 was whether the royal family was still capable of commanding the genuine public affection that provides its only real justification in a modern democratic state. Kate's return answered all of those questions simultaneously. Not through policy, not through constitutional reform, not through the substantive institutional changes that the institution's critics have demanded for decades. Through imagery. Through a woman in a white dress at Wimbledon, receiving a standing ovation from thousands of people who genuinely, deeply, unreservedly loved her. The palace understood this with the cold, unsentimental clarity that comes from an institution that has been navigating existential threats for a very long time. Kate's cancer recovery was not merely a personal story. It was a monarchical asset. The most powerful monarchical asset the institution had possessed in years. Possibly since the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee, possibly longer. A princess fighting cancer, a family rallying around her, a woman returning. A crowd is rising. This is the emotional argument for monarchy, not the constitutional theory, not the economic justification, not the historical tradition. The simple, devastating power of a moment that makes millions of people feel something true and deep and protective. And so the palace deployed that asset, methodically, sequentially, with the precision of an institution that has been managing public emotion for a very long time indeed. Now, was Kate complicit in this? I want to be careful here because this question is more nuanced than it might initially appear, and this channel does not do cheap verdicts. Kate is not a passive figure in her own narrative. She has never been. She is an intelligent, strategically aware, deeply committed member of an institution she has chosen, with her eyes open, to dedicate her life to. She understood she could not have failed to understand what her return meant institutionally. She understood the machinery surrounding it. She understood that her Wimbledon appearance was not simply about attending a tennis match. It was about sending a signal to the public, to the media, to the institution's critics, to the world. But she also genuinely had cancer. She genuinely went through treatment. She genuinely recovered. The emotion in that Wimbledon crowd was real, and, in all probability, the emotion Kate herself felt walking into that stadium, hearing that ovation, sensing the love of thousands of strangers who'd worried about her, was real too. Profoundly, humanly real, in a way that no communication strategy could manufacture, and no staging could fake. This is the layering that makes the palace's operation so technically impressive and, simultaneously, so morally complex to evaluate. The staging and the authenticity were not opposites. They were not in tension in the simple, binary way that the phrase, "it was staged," might suggest. They were woven together, deliberately and skillfully, until the seam between them became invisible to anyone not actively looking for it. The managed moment and the genuine emotion occupied the same physical space, the same fraction of a second, the same frame. And the result was something that felt entirely real, because in the ways that matter to human feeling, much of it was. The palace counts on that complexity. It counts on the fact that most people, confronted with an image that is simultaneously genuine and managed, will resolve the ambiguity in favor of the genuine. Because the alternative of interrogating every royal moment for its production architecture is exhausting. And because the genuine affection for Kate makes that interrogation feel almost disloyal. But forensic commentary is not disloyalty. It is the opposite. It is the only way of engaging seriously with public figures and public institutions. And so here is what the long-term picture actually looks like. Because the operation's success in 2024 creates its own set of forward pressures that the palace has not fully reckoned with. Kate's power, her genuine, unmanufactured, emotionally resonant power over the public, derives from one source above all others: the perception that she is real. That beneath the protocol and the couture and the choreography, she is a person, a mother, a wife. A woman who got sick and was frightened, got better, and came back. That perception is not just sentimentally valuable. It is the foundational asset on which everything else, every photograph, every appearance, every institutional benefit she provides, depends. The moment the public feels that the person and the performance have fully separated, the moment Kate becomes, in the public's collective perception, primarily an image rather than a human being, that power does not diminish, it dissolves, quickly, irreversibly, in the way that public trust, once broken at a fundamental level, rarely reconstitutes itself. And the palace, in its eagerness and its institutional need to deploy Kate as a strategic asset throughout 2024, was operating at the edge of exactly that risk. The manipulated photograph was the warning sign. It showed what happens when the management of Kate's image prioritizes the institutional requirement over authentic representation. It showed briefly, jarringly, the machinery beneath the warmth. Going forward, as Kate takes on an increasingly central role in the working monarchy, as William continues to build what some observers have called the shadow reign, the pressure on Kate's image will intensify, not diminish. The engagements will multiply, the international tours will resume. The public expectations, already high, will grow with her role. And the question that 2024's staged return ultimately raises, the question that cuts beneath all the individual appearances and all the individual communications decisions, is this. Has the palace genuinely learned from the experience of this past year? Has the near catastrophe of the manipulated photograph and the extraordinary work required to recover from it produced an institutional commitment to managing Kate's image with greater restraint, greater transparency, greater respect for the public's intelligence? Or has the success of the 2024 operation produced a different lesson entirely? That the machinery works, that the public, confronted with genuine emotion in the right environment, will absorb the staging without interrogating it, that Kate's personal qualities are robust enough to survive any level of management, and that the institution can therefore continue deploying her as it sees fit, confident that her authenticity will always provide sufficient cover. Because those two lessons point in very different directions. One leads toward a monarchy that earns its relevance through genuine transparency and genuine service. The other leads toward an institution that has learned it can use its most valuable human asset without limit, because she is too real, too loved, and too committed to ever push back in a way that would cost the palace anything. Kate's return was a triumph, measured purely by the metrics that the palace applies to these operations: coverage tone, approval rating movement, institutional narrative control. It was close to flawless. The woman herself was extraordinary throughout. The courage required to step back into that level of public exposure while still navigating the physical and psychological aftermath of cancer treatment is not something that should be minimized or taken for granted. What she did in 2024 was genuinely remarkable. But triumphs built on staging carry a specific risk. They establish expectations that only more staging can sustain. They create a public appetite for the emotionally charged moment that then requires the next emotionally charged moment to maintain. And they place an institution's most valuable asset under a pressure that, if left unexamined and unchecked, will eventually extract a cost. The next chapter of Kate's public life will reveal which lesson the palace took from 2024. And this channel will be here, watching, analysing, and telling you exactly what we see without the palace press pass, without the access agreement, and without the editorial constraint that comes with both. Because here is what I want you to sit with tonight. Not a simple verdict, not a clean conclusion that resolves the complexity into something comfortable. The real question. Do you think Kate knows, fully, consciously, with complete clarity, exactly how her recovery was used by the palace as an institutional rescue operation in 2024? And if she does know, if she walked into every one of those carefully designed moments with complete awareness of what she was doing and why, does that make her complicit in the staging? Or does it make her something considerably more interesting than complicit? Does it make her a remarkable, clear-eyed, strategically brilliant woman doing precisely what she has always done, serving an institution she genuinely believes in, with every tool available to her, including and especially herself? Tell me below. I mean it. This one is genuinely nuanced. I want every perspective. The sympathetic reads and the forensic ones. The people who think the palace machinery is a necessary evil and the people who think it has gone too far. Because these questions do not have easy answers, and the comment section on this channel is where we work through them properly. And if you have made it this far, if you have sat with this for the full length of this analysis, then you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel exists for. Subscribe right now, because topic 12 is coming, and it involves a document that Charles signed that has direct and permanent implications for the future of Harry's children. Their titles, their security, their place or absence of place within the institution. It is the story nobody in the mainstream press has assembled in full. We have. And it changes everything you think you know about how that situation was handled, and by whom, and why. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you next.